And whenever you're ready, Danielle, I'm going to go shut that door.
I just want to get that YouTube link up.
Let's get to play a fun game tonight with Danielle.
Mm-hmm.
I got to test it. I liked it.
Sorry guys, I'm on there. Now we're back. All right, so like I said, I'll be talking about the effects of social media on performance. So generally what we're going to be talking about today is looking at overall current research of social media on the general population. So not just athletes. And asking ourselves, why do we engage in social media? Why are they so addicted to social media? Why do we get on social media in the first place? Then we'll talk about selective attention and multitasking, and basically how they relate to performance, because really that's what it comes down to. Then we'll look specifically at the effects of social media on performance in the sporting population. And we'll talk about your athlete awareness and getting them still to that ideal performance state with social media. And then finally, suggestions for managing social media with your athletes. So the current research right now, specifically on social media in sports, effects on performance, I found one article. And I knew about this presentation back in June. I was really excited about it because as a coach, I was really interested in it. And from coaching from 1996 up until 2016, I'd seen the social media grow and kids being on their phone and the effects of it on performance as well as just everyday practicing. So I was really interested in this topic. So I really went in and I dug around and I tried to find as much information as I can. And that's not going on Wikipedia or going on just general Google sites. That's actually going into the research and scholarly articles done in this area. So I did some digging. And what I looked for was specifically social media and mood, so how that affects our mood. And then I looked at the topics and really discussed what does it mean when we're on social media and how would that affect our performance. And really what it comes down to is where we're putting our attention. So it comes down to selective attention. So I got some research in that area, not once again specifically in sport, but on performance. Similar with multitasking. And then I looked a little bit on school performance and social media. And finally, there's lots and lots of interest in the area and research in marketing and social media in sports. So in fact, that's probably, when I put in social media and performance in sports or social media in sports, it's all marketing and branding. So there's plenty there. So just wanting to put the question out to all of you is, what is your current experience, or what has your experience been in coaching and how social media is now becoming more and more popular? Or I don't know if it can really get even more popular, but who knows? What do you feel the effects are on your athletes, or what do you feel the effects are on yourself?
I think it's significant. Mm-hmm. It impacts many areas. I've seen it. I've coached, different age groups of girls. Mm-hmm. So I think particularly girls do seem affected by social media, and it helps. They make decisions based on things they're seeing in social media. Mm-hmm. So it's something you need to be aware of. You can't ignore it or just say, don't do it. That's not really an option. So as a coach, I do like to know what's out there and what they're seeing. Instagram and Snapchat would be their mode of choice for teenage girls, I'm going to say between 15 and 20 and on. Facebook to them is their way to talk to their grandmother, and YouTube is their way to find a TV show. So, you know, there's, to them, it's their source. An email is not the way they communicate at all. If you want to get a response, you have to go to Snapchat, not even group texting.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it's something you have to know, but it's using it for the positive as opposed to seeing it as negative, I think is the best way to do it.
Yeah, you can't fight it.
Yeah.
And so online, we have a couple of comments from our colleagues online. So we have, it can be a distraction. Another coach says distraction during training, comparison between each other. Distraction for sure, huddling in small groups to check their accounts. Duncan says complete lack of control of focus and communication. And another coach, Brittany, says taken away from the team wholeness at events, practices, etc. And personally, I'll notice my trampoline athletes, I coached my snowboard, but I have to coach trampoline this part, but this fall I've noticed I walk into the change room and it's really awkward because I walk in and ask them all how they're doing and they're all on their phones on social media. And I sit there awkwardly, not really knowing what to do. And then I'm like, okay, practice time. And we go out and they leave the phones. But it's become very odd.
In going to different clubs and working with different teams, and especially working in areas where there's a different apparatus that they all can't be on at the same time. And I've been to trampoline practices. And when they're not on the apparatus, they're on their phones.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
Sunday night I had to say a couple times, please put the phones away.
I have one little guy on our team that I'm coaching. He's addicted, and his personality has changed totally.
Is it gaming or social media, would you say?
Pardon me?
Is it from gaming or social media?
Social media, major. And it's affecting his schoolwork, friendships, even friendship, because I think they bug each other, and if they don't hear back in 2 seconds, they get upset. And they're just saying, oh my God, why aren't they, you know? So it's...
How old? 13, did you say?
13.
Oh, 15. Yeah, it's definitely addictive. And we'll talk about that as well, the addictive properties of it. So so we see definitely a lot of negative impact. And when we look at the general population, we see, unfortunately, a lot of negative impact. So still somehow, I know Snapchat and Instagram are so popular, but Facebook is still the #1 site both in America and in Canada. And we see about 22.6 million Canadians have a Facebook account. And if we consider that our population is around 35 million, and consider the elderly and you consider young, we're at 62% of our population has a Facebook account. So that's a huge number. And I would say if we looked at the population that can have a Facebook account, which I didn't look into, I'd imagine that we're upwards of 90%. So what we see is more frequent use of the internet is associated with negative psychological well-being. And this is one of those things that, what's the cart before the horse? Is it the negative psychological well-being that people have more time for themselves and they're more on the internet? Or is it they're on the internet and it's causing more negative well-being? More specifically, another study looked at the increase in social media use, so specifically social media, increased rates of depression, anxiety, loneliness, distracted driving, and lower levels of satisfaction and productivity. One of the main reasons why people get on social media in the first place is to communicate and for the support. And what they're finding is that it's actually undermining these fulfilling connections and communications instead of enhancing it. And once again, a separate study, this study looked more at adolescents. They saw that viewing social media intensified feelings of irritability, anxiety, and inadequacy. So a lot of not so great things associated with social media in general. So why do we use social media? Why do people engage in social media? What is it about it? Why are you guys all on social media in some way?
A little bit.
Okay. I still have friends that don't have any
I don't have
accounts.
a Facebook account.
Okay,
Never
yeah.
have.
No.
You're, I think, only the second person I've ever met.
My assistant doesn't have a
Oh, wow,
Facebook.
hey.
There's two of us. We're
Yeah.
But why are the kids on there?
Mhm.
They'll hit a dopamine 300 times a day. What do they say? The research says that they check their phones, a normal person average over 70 times a day.
Yeah,
Because they
I
want
believe
to
it.
show.
dopamine,
Yeah, they're addicted to
oxytocin.
it.
Yeah.
But again, it's a choice, just like any addiction. So with our kids, what we've asked them to do is we're trying to change the paradigm a little bit and ask them not to use social media when they're on camps. 10 days of social media.
That's impressive.
But it's an ask, it's not a demand.
Okay.
We do demand phones don't go on the hill, and it's not what you think. It's because kids break in and lose them, and their parents are on us.
Totally.
But if we can get them to voluntarily do this and see benefits in their training,
Mhm.
and the serious kids who want to be better will figure it out.
Mhm.
The kids that don't probably aren't going to go that far in their sport. So it becomes social within the sort of athletic endeavor that we're trying to do. It becomes, if somebody's getting better and they're not using social media, then the other kids are going to notice. And this is how we get them to put it down.
Mhm.
So
The
we-
buy-in is there.
yeah, we've done some experiments with it. It's starting to work, but it takes somebody doing well and other kids seeing why, and then saying, "I'm going to put it down too," and having the whole sort of group, the whole group of kids has to shift. The
Yeah.
other thing we did was we still do social networking, but social networking doesn't involve phones.
Mhm.
We play cards, we play board games.
Yeah.
We do stuff at camp that involves this.
People. Yeah.
Even for me to be here is because I find I don't get enough. I don't get this from
Yeah, right, 100%.
right? It's not the same.
And yeah, I don't get this from that.
This is social, that's not really. It's social media.
And so our online group says it's their form of news, which is, becoming more and more. Fear of missing out, the need to know. Another one echoes the need to know. A lazy way to connect with people was another comment made. And it's their language and communication medium was the last comment online.
Good. Well, specifically what they looked at, why we engage, why we share, is we get a hit of dopamine. Every time we share or we get online, that dopamine, that search and seeking, and it's kind of the neurotransmitter that elicits want. And so we want to see, we want to know, we want to look. And so anytime we're on there, we get a hit of dopamine. In fact, one of the statistics I read was that it's harder to resist tweeting than it is to resist smoking a cigarette or drinking alcohol. And because of the pull with the dopamine in that situation. So I was saying, imagine Donald Trump, how much dopamine is going through his.
That's true,
So,
constant tweeting.
And then we have oxytocin, and oxytocin is kind of like our cuddle neurotransmitter, or hormone. And we get that when we are hugged or kissed or physical touch as elicits oxytocin. But what we're seeing is that oxytocin is actually released when we look at social media as well. Second reason why people are on there to entertain others. They go out as a service to others, sharing their story. And posting, quite often people ask, will this be interesting to others? They're not just posting it for themselves. On the other hand, we do love talking about ourselves. If you go online, almost 80% of what you're seeing being posted is talking about themselves. Self-expression, so people write, people play music, people listen to music to self-express. But what we're seeing is when they're self-expressing online, they're expressing their idealized self, like how they would like to be seen. So they're only posting the good and what they would want to share versus some of the more serious or negative things that they don't want to share. Number 5 is to stay connected with friends and family, and I think quite often that's the answer that I get, but we're seeing that less and less because all of these other things we don't realize sometimes are there. It's a form of social currency, so we can increase our stock. If we're marketing, if we're trying to gain interest in any kind of avenue or any type of field, it's important for stock. And you can be the first to inform on certain things. And finally, we're seeing that people are doing this to support a cause. So those were kind of reasons as to why we share on social media. Why is it, what was missing for that list? What happens when we don't engage? What happens when we're not on social media?
Not in the loop.
Yeah, you're not in the loop. And so what we're seeing in FOMO, fear of missing out, was actually added to the Webster's Dictionary back in 2013.
Oh, wow.
And so it's an actual thing. It's the fear or it's the anxiety of missing, that something is happening and you're not aware of it, okay? And that you're missing out on something. So this creates that dependency. So it's the drive to stay in the loop, and that's what creates that unhealthy behavior of constantly checking. And as we know, and as I showed earlier, constantly checking and constantly being on social media, once again, leads to anxiety, leads to feelings of unworthiness and dissatisfaction. Specifically, dissatisfaction, they found that, and this isn't in athletes, this is in the general population, when they're seeing a situation where they feel that they have less, or when the situation is something that they're envious of, that makes the dissatisfaction obviously even greater. And this was shown to be more in men than it was in women. So this is America, and this is from 2015, and I have some stats on my notes here as well. Actually, I'm gonna just go up there. Okay, so 45% of Generation Z reported their mental health as excellent or very good, whereas 56% of millennials did, 51% of Generation X, and 70% of boomers and 74% of adults older than 73. So we're seeing a decline in good mental health, and we're seeing an incline in stress over the ages. So Generation Z is not here on this one, but I'd expect that it's higher. And so this is average stress level by generation, and this is how many days, or on a scale of 1 to 10, where you have little or no stress, and 10 being you have a great deal of stress. How would you rate your average level of stress during the past month?
6.
Mm-hmm.
That's high.
Mm-hmm. And consider that's going to be even higher for Generation Z. So what is it about being on social media that affects our ability to do other tasks?
That one's easy.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
Human beings do not have the capacity to do more than one thing at a time with all their focus on that one thing. So as soon as you do more than one, both suffer.
Yeah, you're dividing your
So,
focus.
and when you do 3 and 1 and 1,
Mhm.
it gets worse. So the more you divide, the less you spend. So when kids are trying to deliberately practice, we don't get that if they have this. You're not getting what they can do. I mean, even if they're preoccupied with something, in their head besides that, you're not getting the complete focus on task at hand.
I agree.
We have a generation of kids who have no idea how to
Oh, yeah.
be at all, and that's our biggest problem, and this is the biggest thing that does that.
But the thing is, it is only gonna get worse, and then,
Unless we can educate.
yes, and that's hopefully what today will be, in some way, to be able to pass it on. Although, and we'll get to that in a little bit, but it is gonna be at one point, how do we make it, on the other hand, how can we make certain things work if there's not gonna be, if we can't create that culture and can't stop it completely? Because as things move forward and as old school ways of coaching go, there's going to be people out there that still just social media, this is part of their coaching or way of coaching. Okay, so yes, like you said, selective attention. So when we move our attention, we can only focus on one thing at a time very thoroughly. So we're going to do a little experiment here. And I think we have an ad here, sorry. Not trying to promote this, it's just... Okay.
The monkey business illusion. Count how many times the players wearing white pass the ball. The correct answer is 16 passes.
Did everyone say 16?
The gorilla tried to distress.
Did you spot the gorilla?
Did everyone see the girl in the room? Okay,
For
wow.
people who haven't seen or heard about a video like this before, about half missed the gorilla. If you knew about the gorilla, you probably saw it. But did you notice the curtain changing color or the player on the black team leaving the game?
Ooh, missed that part. Yeah.
Let's rewind and watch it again.
Okay, poor people online.
They were red and yellow.
Here comes the gorilla, and there goes a player, and the curtain is changing from red to gold.
Yeah, never noticed that.
I didn't notice the curtain.
No.
No. I was happy I got a count and the lower right, I was like so
Okay, then
ecstatic.
there's the often other unexpected events.
Yeah.
And
So a
that's
lot
the
of
monkey
people
business
have-
illusion.
have
Learn more
heard
about this illusion with you.
Yeah, so a lot of people have any of you seen that before?
Someone online used it with their lifeguards.
Okay.
Oh, that would be a good.
Yeah, that's a good thing.
Cool with lifeguards.
Yeah.
Oops. Finally got it working on my computer. Okay.
So yes, sorry, what was your name?
Gregor.
Gregor? Okay, as Gregor said, we are really not great multitaskers. So we like to think of ourselves as great multitaskers, but we actually are quite bad at multitasking. It is a very limited, our attention is a very limited resource. And so as soon as we're dividing it, we're decreasing the quality of our attention. So selective attention allows us to tune out unimportant details and focus on what really matters. But at the time, what is really mattering? What matters to your athlete? So maybe it's what's on their phone and not what you're saying. So what really matters is subjective to your athlete. So we're gonna do another experiment, and I've never done this before. I just made this up. So we're gonna see how it works. So I want you to get out your phones.
Which I have to actually go
Yes.
get, so this is a shock.
And I want you to choose a social media. And I want you to get on the social media. And I want you to scroll through. And I want you to find something interesting on there. And when you find something interesting, I want you to consider what you would respond, or what you would comment,
Forgot it.
or what you
It's even
would,
rarer.
so consider responding
Scroll through.
or actually respond.
Typically respond.
Cute.
You can. I got a lot of
So in chronic multitaskers, we're seeing that people that are chronically multitasking are actually worse than people that are light multitaskers. So when we're doing cognitive tasks, those people that consider themselves or that are constantly multitasking are actually worse than people that don't multitask very often.
Yeah, I don't know, I'm just looking for.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, good. Did anyone hear what I had to say while you were were you checking? What was I
Typically,
talking about?
multitaskers and their inability to do other things.
Mm-hmm.
Better off if you're a light multi.
Yeah.
Okay, like
Yeah.
multitasker, okay, yeah. And how good were you at engaging at both what I was saying? Because I was talking, specific about chronic multitaskers, people that multitask and considered heavy multitaskers, and people that don't multitask very often. How many of you were actually able to take that message away while actually engaging in your social media and looking through the stories that you were
No, I had to look up and reread what you have written.
Yeah, oh, you were looking
Yeah, I
at
was
it.
just like, I didn't catch what she said, so I'm gonna
Yeah,
read what she wrote here just to make sure I didn't miss it.
Yeah, so I was purposely talking while you guys were doing that. Because we cannot hear what someone is saying really well, or we can hear little words. We heard multitasking, we heard chronic, but can we take away the message while we're properly engaging and trying to consider what we would write in a comment?
This is what drives me nuts, I'll have to say, with that it's not just our athletes, that I see this most heavily in meetings.
Yes.
And I feel like then things are being repeated again and again and again because people are on their phone, and not listening.
And then they'll catch like a little bit at the end, and sometimes it'll be, they'll have something to say, but they wouldn't have got all that part beforehand that's
So you're
already been
repeating.
discussed. Yeah, so
Yeah.
exactly repeating.
Yeah, so like athlete meetings with coaches, like those I find the most frustrating, at least, especially when you're on a hill, you can tell the phone to go, or, the phone's away at least during the activity of sport, but it's all those other things that it's the worst.
Yeah,
Well,
and
we stayed at a hotel last winter that was out of cell
Oh,
amazing.
Was it ever
That must
interesting?
have
Was
been
it
awesome.
ever interesting?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We should
Did
go back
anyone
there
go
every time.
We're going again, for
Okay.
coaches and athletes, it was really
Yeah.
interesting.
Where was that?
It's at, outside Sussex, outside Foley Mountain, there's this
Yeah.
lodge in the woods,
Yeah.
and it's, they have Wi-Fi in the main lodge only, but there's no cell service, which is pretty neat,
Yeah, that's great.
so there was a lot more time.
And in fact, you see a lot of places now offering vacations that
Yeah,
are
they turn it off.
specifically for that. Yeah. But no, we see this. This isn't just seen in athletes. This is seen. I see this at home. I'm talking to my husband. And he goes, "What did I say?" And he'll repeat the last word, but he can't just do everything I just told.
As soon as my husband wakes up at 4:30 in the morning, he's got the phone in his face everywhere. And who in the hell do you text or look at 4:30 in the morning? Constant.
Yeah.
He's so addicted. Well, he's doing it for work
Mm-hmm.
as well, but I call it his mistress. Because whenever we travel, his mistress goes and he's on and he's doing work and stuff, but
Yeah, it's good, and we'll talk about setting restrictions and multimedia diet.
But it's not all bad, like,
No, it isn't.
that's no different than 20 years ago.
Yeah.
I'd read the paper when I got up.
Yeah.
And so it's just a form of,
A new form of information.
so.
And we'll talk about that in a bit. So what are the pros and cons? And how does this pertain to sport performance? So that little kind of experiment right there, how does that pertain to sport performance?
I think the pro is that there's an increased amount of information available now, and that whether it has to do with specific skill development or just general knowledge, at least in our sport. Yes, it seems like a hamper at some aspects, but then the kids are like watching other top athletes go down certain parts of the course, and they're like, wow, they're hard left on the left line, when like, you know, I didn't think you could ride that, or like whatever. So there is some benefit to it
Yeah.
outside of that.
Definitely.
But then on the flip side, I guess the cohesiveness of the group at camps is affected with social media for sure. So they're not as engaged with each other outside of, like, we don't have a problem in our sport during practice or surrounding it, because they don't have access. They don't have access to it. So
Yeah.
the moment you get changed to the moment you get unchanged, you don't really have your phone. But definitely, like, traveling and being together is not as cohesive.
Yeah.
I think too, like in terms of actual performance in competition, if, you know, an athlete, depending on what kind of restrictions you might place on your athletes, or if they come up with something, if an athlete sees something that affects them negatively, or they just can't get it out of their head. You know, I have an athlete a few years ago who, you know, recalled one of her teammates, you know, basically having a negative sort of thing happen with her boyfriend just before going into a game. So the player actually brought, you know, the cell phone into the glove.
Oh my goodness.
And on
Tried to
every
play with
shift, she'd be,
Oh my goodness.
now this is, you know,
An extreme.
an extreme
Yeah.
case, but it just, you know, her head's not in that game. So, you know, there's that whole side of it. Whereas, you know, there's lots of pros too. So it's finding that balance of being able to, you know, get the pros out of it without having so many cons.
I think it's a neat tool. Like, it's been nice in snowboarding at the end of a practice. If they can grab their phones, you can pair them up to go free ride, and you know you can reach them. Because like 12 years ago, I couldn't do that. Like, at the end of the practice day, it was like, sorry, you have to come back with me now, and we're all super controlled. And yeah, like now you can say, okay,
There's
if
a
the
little
two
bit
of you
more
are
of a
paired
leash.
and you both have your
Yeah.
cell phones, like, you know, you can go free ride for a bit. So that's a pro. And then we had 2 online agreed with what you were saying, John, with the pros and cons. And then Jennifer says, if the athletes are focusing on social media while at competition or practice, they're not engaging with the team. So yeah, very similar. As a communication method between coach athletes as a tool to share articles, video related to sport, it's great. Cons, increased communication expectation when not in the realm of the competition training. That's an interesting one, yeah. Pat says, a pro is that the athletes are far better informed and that forms the basis of great coach-athlete discussions. A con is that I think it's disruptive for sleep patterns. Oh yeah, that's a good one too.
And yeah, I didn't put that in the original few slides just on the effects, because I was looking more at social media, but just our phones in general do affect our sleep patterns. Or screen time.
From a coaching perspective, I really like, you know, 10 years ago, I wouldn't have been able to scout another team that's across the country. And now I can usually find a game that team has played. So it gives you some preparation that you didn't have before. So, you know, that goes a long way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's definitely one of the pros that we'll talk about in the good aspects.
It's a great marketing tool.
Yeah.
Plain
No.
and simple.
Yeah, you can't really beat it. Okay, so, well, you said it's all true, and we'll get to some of those. Was just looking specifically at pre-competition, or when you were just about to do a task, just like when I was getting you to do a task and I was talking. So basically, what it comes down to is distraction. And distraction can be a pro, and distraction can be a con. And what we're seeing, or what we need to consider before we look at, is distraction a pro for your athletes, or is distraction a con? We need to consider, what are your athletes' regular tendencies outside of sport? Are they people that are always on the phone? Is this something that is part of what they do first thing when they get up. What are their regular tendencies? How addicted are they already? What are you and your athletes used to at practice and in competitions? What are they currently doing? What do they do in their other sports? What are people doing on social media? Are they there because they want to share a picture of them at that competition? Or are they there to actually have conversations? What is their main purpose? Or what are they tending to do when they're in a pre-competition state? And what some of them are like a lot of nerves, some of them need very, also depending on what sport we're talking about. Curling, we need a lot less nerves. Snowboarding, we need a lot more nerves. And so what are their needs? Are they needing to be hyped? Are they needing to be focused? Are they needing to be relaxed? Or do they need to be distracted? So where do they sit in this performance and emotional arousal spectrum? If they're having great performances, they're on their phones, then it might be a good thing. Some of the distraction, and we'll get to that literature, but some of the distraction is actually shown to be very positive before an anxiety-provoking task. And then if we're over-arousal, once again, for instance, that story about your athlete, when it's something that is so distracting that it's stressful, and then under-arousal, when people are already bored and they're just not into it, being on your phones is not going to help you anymore. So those are some things to consider where your athletes are. Having that awareness, having your athlete have that awareness as well. So, as I said, effects of social media can be good, bad, or athletes. So some of the good is a distraction. One study that I looked at actually found that it was more helpful in keeping anxious feelings to a low level before anxiety-provoking tasks or an anxiety-provoking situation. And that was a physical situation as well. And it was so helpful that it was even more helpful than a positive anticipatory it was when they were distracted. And so when I read that, I was really interested, obviously coming from a sports psychology background, as to why that would be. And I thought to myself, well, if you think about it, when you take a kid to go get a needle, and you tell them think positive thoughts before you get it, versus trying to distract them with other things, they're going to be a lot less nervous if you're trying to distract them, if you're trying to get them to think positive thoughts. So it was found to be the most effective emotion regulation strategy in helping people cope with pressure instead of choke with pressure, which is also very interesting. That was a separate study. Those are two different studies, and I'd have to look at my notes as to where exactly they came from, but they were done in sport-related tasks. And so looking at the 5 benefits of distraction, it provides balance. So it is good to distract ourselves every so often, and being able to work on our other tasks or work on something else with more focus and going back to it. It improves memory retention. It provides comfort. It can rejuvenate the body. And so when I think of that, I think they're not talking about social media particularly. They're talking about getting out, having a tea, or getting out and walking around. And it can inspire creativity. So we're better able to think outside of the box. We're not just narrowly focusing all of our attention over a long period of time on one thing. So going on further about the good, like you said, sponsorship and branding and marketing. Nothing beats social media. It provides a in addition, it gives them better leverage to gain marketing opportunities. Another good is getting support from friends and family. So now that when people are traveling to different competitions. A lot of times parents and family can't come, and sometimes that's heavily relied on. Sometimes people want to talk to their friends and family throughout the span of a competition, and this allows for that.
I do find there's like a bit of the opposite happening too, where like a lot of our athletes don't want to communicate with their parents.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel it falls a little bit on myself to maintain that social media presence,
Okay.
because they're the supporters that basically fund these things.
Yeah.
Right? And the happier the parents are that the kids are getting the experience that they want those kids to have, then the more likely they are to continue to support them.
Yeah.
So from a coaching point of view, I feed them little nuggets, but
Okay.
it ties up my time, and I'm not a big social media guy myself, so it's kind of annoying.
Yeah.
I always text them or tell them, I'm like, you just gotta text your parents once a day, please, because, and they text me, and I don't have time to deal with them.
Yeah, that's interesting, and certainly would be difficult to take on as a coach.
So I think that the bottom line is definitely important, but the maturity of the athlete plays into how much connection they want to maintain with their friends or their family. Let's say friends, obviously they're engaged in frequently.
With some athletes, when we get to certain levels, it allows them to interact with their fans and allows their fans to feel like they're part of the moment. Again, linking back to branding and marketing. And another positive is that media, the general media, is no longer a gatekeeper. So athletes can create their own narratives. It's not what media just wants to show. It's what they want to show, what story they want to tell. And this allows for athletes to transcend like structural challenges. So, for instance, whereas we were in the media, because we can go and look at it. So now looking at the bad, did anyone have any more good to add to that list? What I missed? Okay. So, distraction. Like I said, distraction can be good and it can be bad. It depends on how distracting and how stressful the information is that they're receiving. So if we know that the ideal performance state for an athlete is to have a narrow focus on the activity itself, well, any type of distraction is going to take you away from that. Okay? So we know from many studies that ideal performance state, one of the 7 components to it, is that it's a narrow focus on the activity itself. And if we take that away, we're not going to hit our ideal performance state. But once again, no research has been done specifically on that. When we're distracted, we're not getting a lot of other information, just like we did in our little experiment a few minutes ago. So we're not hearing our coach properly. We're not noticing what our teammates, we're not interacting with our teammates. We're not getting that group cohesion. And changes to schedule. Things might be going faster, might be going slower. If someone's engaged on their phone and not getting all the information, that's just, even if they find the information but a little bit later, that's still going to create stress. And finally, they may receive information that is not just distracting, but actually stressful. So the one study that did look at social media on performance was done at Pyeongchang. And what they found was that media is a stressor. And we already know that from our general information. But they found that it was rated as one of the 4 sources of stress for athletes. And that they found that athletes who were on Facebook up to 2 hours before they competed showed higher levels of stress and performance anxiety. So what they found specifically was that if they were receiving negative commentary on their social media, their belief in their ability was compromised. And if you think about that with your athletes, if anyone is trash talking, and I mean, we deal with trash talking in a lot of sports regardless, but if it's something directed at you and you get it on your phone right before you go to compete, that's not going to be helpful. And then fans that are trying to trip people up and trolling social networks have an actual way to get in there and affect their performance negatively. So it's kind of opening Pandora's box. So the reason why they're saying that it affects performance anxiety or increases performance anxiety is because it shifts our focus from internal to external and the opinions of others, and our self-efficacy and our belief in our ability can be affected. And so looking at the ugly, and this isn't specifically on performance, but this is just looking at how social media can affect athletes in an ugly way. One of them being the effects on body image. A study looked at sexualized images and self-objectification, whereas viewing images of increased physical self-description. Viewing sexualized images increased self-objectification, whereas viewing performance images increased self-description. So when we see athletes, and this was done with athletes, performing, that's more helpful in describing something that we want to have for ourselves. Versus when they're in sexualized images, which often they are in some way, it looks at self-objectification, so comparing oneself and our abilities to that person. Higher levels of Facebook use also displayed significantly lower body satisfaction compared to those who use Facebook less. And when comparing oneself to one that was considered of upward appearance, so someone that they would consider better looking, social media may promote increased body image concerns and immunity. And secondly, cyberbullying. So we know that it's linked to depression and suicide. So once again, these are the ugly situations with social media. And I have worked with various athletes that have had cyberbullying, that have had impact on their body image. So it's not infrequent that these things occur. So, yep. Okay. So what can be done? What are your current restrictions that you have on social media or on phones in general?
I'm sorry. Okay. Each team, we sort of agree on what parameters they want to set. So I'll look to last season. We would sort of take the phones at night so that they got to bed at a decent time. Okay. And for meals, so that they actually interacted with each other. And once we got into a tournament, we actually kept the phones from an overnight because we had found out that our flight was canceled. So we knew that information would create a whole other level of anxiety. So we just kind of, until the tournament was done, we didn't give them back their phones. And they appreciated that. They actually said that was really smart because we would have been a mess. Yeah. About something they can't control. The only thing they can control was their performance. Yeah. But we try to get them to put the parameters in because without their buy-in, as Gregor was saying, they're just going to cheat. You know, they're going to find a way. And I mean, taking their phones is kind of more symbolic because they have iPads, they have their laptops, they have all their other devices. So it's kind of that by giving in their phone, they're agreeing to just kind of have a break. And but you know, they're still they need it too. If you take it away from them for too long, you had mentioned it, you see a detrimental effect as well. So gotta be a balance.
Anyone online?
Yeah, we have a bunch of comments online. Just a sec, actually, I have to expand it. That's a good thing. So limit usage during competition and practice. Lynn said if anyone pulls out their phone at a team meal, they have to pay someone's bill.
Oh,
That's
wow.
an interesting one. Yeah, and
I do
Lynn.
have my coaches.
Nice, yeah. And Lynn's in PEI with volleyball. Amanda says, no phones during training or competition. Recommend athletes to not go on social media the day of competition. That's a good one. Christopher says, I benefit from an environmental aspect of the sport that phones just don't mix with the competition very well. But no phones at practice, in the pool, or dry land. No phones at finals, but prelims can run long, so they need something to fill the time between races, so they are allowed. And then Brittany says, I take their phones away when we go for dinner, and at tournaments they stay with their parents or away, so they don't have access. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Glad to hear those. Those are good suggestions. So I found this quote, and I think it's important to consider because we have to work with it in some way. There's not going to be an ideal situation where we don't, where they're not on social media and where it's not affecting them in some way, positive or negative. So we don't have a choice on whether we do social media. The question is how well we do it. One, model appropriate. Anything you learn in parenting, that's the number one thing. Model appropriate behavior. If you're there with your phone out at any time in practice and at the dinner table before you go to bed, have it on you at all times, and they know you have it on you, it's not going to be helpful in buy-in for your athletes. Acknowledge the social importance, but set limits. Okay? Because it is important in their lives, and we can't change that. That doesn't just come from us. That comes from the entire culture. So we have to acknowledge that importance, but we do need to set limits. And be prepared to talk about the good and the bad. One of the sheets that I always like using when making a decision is, okay, so this is my decision. To keep my phone at a competition or to not keep my phone. If I keep my phone, these are the benefits. These are my costs, the cons. If I don't have my phone, these are my benefits. These are my costs. Which one is going to outweigh it? And that might differ per athlete or per sport. But when they have to look at it and they work on that with you, they at least get that awareness of it. And the decision making is a little bit better versus saying you can't have your phone. Because then they're involved in that decision and they can see why one way or the other might be a better. And once again, that type of conversation would be really well done further out of a competition rather than going into a competition. I always say athletes in general, our brains are like sponges, but closer to competition, the less information we're able to take in because our brains don't work as well sometimes. So it's important to have those conversations well in advance. And so like I was saying before, it's kind of like Pandora's box. When we get on social media, we're allowing basically anyone to affect our performance. So when this specific quote came from people that were at the Olympics. So why would you do that? You've trained all your life for this one moment in time. Why would you take out your phone? Unless you're always doing it, and you've done it every big competition up until then. At which point would be a different conversation.
But you still can't predict what you're going to see.
Exactly.
I mean, they can take it
100%.
out because I've always done it, and they see something and
Yep.
just
shock.
torpedoes that whole
100%.
plan.
Yeah.
So it shouldn't be part of the plan,
Yeah.
especially on a competition,
Nope, 100%.
because it's not controllable by them. Right?
Yeah.
They can open it up, but they can't control.
You don't know
what's
what you're
going
gonna
on.
see, yeah, that's a good point.
Okay, so once again, educate. So decreasing that fear of missing out. That's one thing that we want to do, because that is the reason why we're constantly, or why athletes, they have that fear, they have that FOMO, they want to know what's going on, beyond what's going on in that competition, or even what's going on with other people at that
But you
competition.
can spin it around too.
Yeah.
We tried this thing in the camp where it's, okay, we're in the camp. No one gets to know what's in here unless they're here.
Mhm.
So we've now flipped it on its head. People that are outside the camp didn't come, want to know what's going on.
Mhm.
But nobody's firing stuff out on social media
Yeah.
until the camp is done.
Mhm.
Right? When the camp is over, we've all got pictures, and I tell them, you can have your phones, take pictures,
Yeah.
use your phones, take notes if you want, but nothing gets let out of the box
Mhm.
until we're finished. And so what you basically done is turned it around the other way. So everybody
Yeah.
that's outside of this little circle wants to know what's going on inside,
Totally.
rather than vice versa.
That's a great example. And it would just be, once again, to be able to keep that for an extended length of time that they
But there's just ways that you have to think that to get them on the other side, the flip side, and showing them how this can be beneficial to them being better at it.
Mhm.
And as long as they think that it helps, I think they'll buy it. If they don't believe it, they'll use their phones.
Yeah.
So it depends on how invested an athlete is in getting better and doing better. It's the same message that you take to them when you talk to them about mental training. It's also all of a sudden they start, ramping up because they're using it's not that complicated. It's just
They're
it
using
needs
their
to be
skills.
practiced, right?
Okay, so educating on the competition, once again, reminding them that that all these great things that are going on outside of you aren't real. That it's not. People are posting their idealized self. You could be posting your idealized self in this moment, and very much similar to what Greg is saying. You're in a very high level sport, and you're making huge accomplishments. Why the fear of missing out should be coming from other people on what you're doing. Have your athletes be intentional with their friendships. Remind them that it's important to have face-to-face, and this is really important with your team cohesion. So connecting in social media is great for within your team, but it's really important that you guys sit down and have that face-to-face time and that interaction like we're having here. Be present. So once again, you can't have your best performance if you're not in the present moment. And when you're on your phones, you're usually in the past or something that might be coming up in the future. Have screen time goals. When I do goals with athletes now, I actually include goals for screen time. Because now you can monitor it on the icon.
Yeah, and you can show it. They can show it to
Oh,
you.
yeah, they can
right?
show it to you.
I want to see your week. Can I
Yeah.
see it?
Yeah.
Oh, no. It's like, okay, then I know we didn't hit where we want to be. Should we change the goal?
Yeah, exactly. So it's great. And once again, this is nice, well out in advance that we're doing this. And it's changing their behavior. So if they know they can't be on the phone all the time and not being on the phone all the time, that will change their behavior, and we're not going to see them trying to get on the phone all the time at a competition or before a competition. Or it won't have as much impact in not being on the phone.
Well, the other one I asked them to do is use your minutes, not
Mm-hmm.
because using minutes means they have to
Just
speak
talk on the
to
phone.
someone.
Yeah.
And it's very rare that they use their phone
To call
talk,
someone?
right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Unless
They're
they're
doing
out of
this, They
date.
got speedy thumbs.
Nobody
they can
talks
do
to
this.
As soon as they're out of date,
Yeah.
they
But
start
nobody
calling.
phones because even a phone conversation is, there's more,
Mhm.
you hear who the person is, you hear inflections of voices, you can.
Totally.
Yeah, and the kids don't understand conversation very well.
Mm.
Oh,
But an exclamation point or capital letters can take
or an
them a long
emoji.
way
The
all
emoji is
time,
going to
yeah.
change, is going to be a new language.
So I'm happy when you phone me, you want to talk to them, talk to your friends.
Unfortunately, though, this, once again, it's dying. And no matter how hard we fight it, it is dying. The world is just changing in how we interact. It's unfortunately changing. It's not changing. I don't feel it's changing for the better in that sense, because we are losing so so many of
No,
those.
and we need to push back and like that. Otherwise, I think we've seen too many kids, and kids are between 18 and 25. Bad stuff going on.
Yeah.
And it's got nothing to do with sport, it's got a lot to do with this.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
got Depression issues, I mean, there's so much going on, you know.
Yeah, why is this
And
happening?
these are, you know, these aren't just people who do this. This is just bizarre.
Yeah.
And it's happening more and more. You know, I guess the mental health physicians and experts to help them out, you know, okay, what's going on? And a lot of them don't deal with this.
Mhm.
And, you know, people in the 70s didn't have this, so this isn't a problem.
Yeah, exactly. And I think
Yeah.
that's why we saw with those different generations how the
Very
stress.
interesting.
Mhm.
Although people in their 70s, like my mother, who's in her 80s, is very tech savvy.
Yeah.
But doesn't use the tech for what kids do. It's different. Pays bills, reads the news.
Right.
Looks at things that are interesting to her with Google, but not for
Right.
social
The
media.
social.
It's different. She still writes letters, but they're written on a computer.
Right. Yeah.
It's a letter.
Even my grandma, though, who's 93, she had to get told to stay off the computer more because she's ruining her. She would sit on her email all day. So she doesn't use social media or any of those things, but she became like really email obsessed. So she would email me like 4 or 5 times a day
Oh, wow.
at like 92, 93. Yeah. And her eyesight's going. And they said it's going so quickly because she's like, and she has nothing else to do. So she's on her computer all day. So they've asked her, she now has screen time restrictions at 93.
You know, I have a lady at home, and she just got her iPad. And she's not addicted.
Yeah.
But she reads comic book online.
Yeah.
She, I send her stuff, she reads something. Sharp as a tack.
Yeah, so it's amazing to see like that it can breach that
Yes,
generation.
She's prohibited.
Well, talk to a doctor, yeah, because my grandma literally is on restricted access now. Yeah,
Sorry, I.
No worries, yeah.
Thank
Because
you.
we're getting all of this on your seminar.
Yep, it's recorded, and yeah, we can send the slides.
Stephen Wentworth, getting 25 centimeters tomorrow.
25 centimeters more?
At Wentworth.
Oh.
Yeah, not here, it's not coming past her.
Yeah.
We're gonna get
Thanks, see
rain.
you next time.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So having a blackout period, so people aren't allowed on their phones, at practices or around competitions, but definitely not on competition day, allowing certain activities like going on the news, like watching a video, or having certain feeds. Certainly no phones at the dinner table. Just really rid of that.
Mm-hmm.
Needs to remain the same. That should be hopefully mirrored at home as well. But I think that just with group cohesion, with communication, with being able to teach some of those good communication skills, we can't have it. Or at the lunch breakfast. Designated social media check-in time. So, okay, our competition is done at this. This is when we're gonna be allowed to post, and if you want to think about what you want to post, that's something you can think about. Or if you need to know something of what somebody else is going on, that's when you can find out. So knowing and having that control of when they can do it is also helpful. No screen time 1 hour before bed.
Find that one.
That helps with.
Yeah.
Oh, 3,
Experts say
4. Wow.
That's, all the sleep studies now say, you should be on any blue screen devices within 4 hours of bed,
Oh, wow.
because it keeps you awake.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been playing with that, because I'm terrible with that. I'm the only person that puts songs in, I've got to go to sleep, and then
Yeah.
you're like, I can't even sleep, but it works.
It's true.
Better to read a book.
Yeah.
But for the kids, we say 3, it should be 4. If
Okay.
you're saying 3 and you're trying to get them to sleep, it's still hard.
And that's a good one too. I found the only thing that helped my athletes do that was like major education with, okay, fine, you can be on your phone right before you go to bed, but know that you're getting this many hours of,
And
good sleep and
cycles are really important, especially when
Yeah.
you're training hard.
Yeah.
yeah.
Because by day 5 of a 10-day camp, the kids crashing.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can ask when were you on your phone until, and yeah. So So, and Pat just made a good point. We missed sort of the great conversation that we had just before that. He said, I see this as a great opportunity for rebuilding the relevance of sport. In sport, we have the opportunity to be fully present and immersed in an activity. It's a very rewarding state, and I think people really like being present. And then some others are agreeing online. I think it's a good
It's
point.
like that whole, when you go outdoors too.
Yeah.
That,
Yes.
you know, the effect 15 minutes outdoors gives
Yeah.
you this positive effect. Sport, to me, has the
Yeah.
same
Yeah.
effect because
Certainly.
it's that your brain.
Disconnect.
Yeah, you can totally focus on what you're doing, being present.
And that's obviously being present is one of the top 3 things that we do with sports psychology. And trying to make social media work for you. So make it part of the pre-competition routine. So if that means no phones, if that means they're allowed 2 hours before, if that means whatever, that it's part and it's planned. Okay? And that's discussed well in advance to the competition. Consider closed groups with your team. So allow them on one app that only has to do with communicating within the team. Use success stories from other athletes. Those are great as a coaching tool to go around and say, okay, well, did you see this person? And actually showing them. And then finally, be tactical. And I think you were saying being able to see what other people are doing across the provinces, across the country, across the world. Coming from a performance sport where choreography is such a big component, being able to see what people are doing in Russia and Asia make a huge difference on what we would do in our choreography. So being able to see those things actually is a very tactical advantage. But also seeing, what types of tricks people are trying to attempt. Once again, what type of snow and what the courses are looking like. So there's lots of ways to use social media in a tactical way. Looking at how certain teams play, looking at what the lineup is that they tend to play on certain games. Those are all really good ways to use social media to your advantage. I mean, it's amazing what you can find on YouTube as far as competitions go, or tournaments go around the world. Okay, so some take-home messages. I don't even have my tongue here. Okay.
It's 8:17. You're doing
All right.
awesome.
So just some take-home messages from today. In general, social media has negative effects on psychological well-being. We are not good multitaskers. We suck. So use those considerations for your ability to listen and see. And use your other senses and be present. Distraction in athletes prior to performance can have positive or negative effects, which I found very, very interesting as far as the psychological component goes. But learn your athlete's needs. And that, once again, that's hard sometimes for coaches to find each need of each athlete. But keep that in consideration. Because when we did this back in September, and it wasn't this presentation, it was just a little bit on social media at the very end of that presentation back in September. We heard so much. There was quite a group of young coaches. Not to say but
They were like 16.
they were Generation Zers. And they talked quite a bit about how they found that distraction to be relaxing, and even just the scrolling to be relaxing. So I definitely heard it firsthand from athletes, and athletes that are doing quite well, that they found that to be relaxing. And if you can't beat them, join them, in the sense of try to make social media is not going to go away. You have to make it work for you.
So I'm going to wait. Generally, the online questions take a little bit because they're typing. But yeah, do you guys have any questions for Danielle? I know. I think it's some good things to think about and reflect upon. I like the aspect of where is it fitting in the pre-competition plan? Because
Yeah.
it's true, it's just not a piece that even 10 years ago was in that plan. So,
It's interesting, even in, because I'm teaching right now at Dow, a course on counseling for health and well-being,
mm,
and it's not even in the textbook.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah,
social, and that textbook is new, that textbook's from 2017. And the considerations for social
Yeah.
media just aren't there.
Well, there was a good piece on the news last week, the national news, where they're going to introduce it into elementary school and high school curriculums so that
Yeah.
kids are aware of what and how and the effects of social media. It's being put forward as something that I think they should bring to schools to educate. It's like that
yeah.
probably is a good idea.
Yesterday, yeah.
Yeah.
We've already seen the issues.
Yeah,
Yeah. We're way behind. Yeah.
We are, and I,
Because they come up with new ways of using.
exactly, that's what I was gonna say, and I
Social
feel like
media.
we're gonna continue to stay behind, you know.
Like, I
Behind, yeah.
consider, I'm gonna say, 10 years ago, Facebook was for 13, 14-year-olds, or if they were just on it, they would do this TBH, which is to be honest. And so they'd write TBH, and other friends would have to share something that they're being honest about. So we never see each other anymore. Well, I only see you in school, I don't see you. So they would say, and typically they'd ask for a TBH so that they could get some positive
And
feedback.
give talk about
Right.
stuff.
So now, 10 years later, it's Instagram, and they do polls. And the poll is,
Oh.
do you like this outfit? Yes or no? Or, tell me something. And they do TBH now on Instagram. But Instagram is now, they've morphed that as and a story is what they prefer because the
Right.
story goes away in 24 hours.
Right,
So it doesn't stay up there.
yeah.
And so they can kind of get that hit. So you just see they're using it in different ways, but it's kind of the same effect that they're getting, just a different medium.
Yeah.
But it's
And same thing with Snapchat.
yeah,
But on the other side of the coin, flip phones are back because
because of
because you can't do
yeah.
social media. So a lot of senior executives, people in offices, they're taking away their smartphones.
And they're going to
Flip
flip
phones.
phones?
So they can text or they can phone. but
That's
they cannot
hilarious.
Multimedia on the phone.
That's
They're
not a
better
bad
flip
way to
phones. It's a
go.
better phone. It's still,
Yeah.
it's a good phone, but it's a phone.
Huh.
One of the things we had noted when we tried this year at camp is you guys can have your phones, but you have to turn on your data.
Yeah,
So your phone is a phone.
yeah,
And at the end of the day, we can check your data.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
we'll know if you're on it or not. So it's voluntary, but it's kind of like Seinfeld and Master of Your Domain, right? It's like who can stay off the
The
and
longest.
because it does, it puts them into what you're trying to do with them, the skills you're trying to teach them. Are they serious about being better at what they do? Or are they so it tells you a little bit about who you're coaching.
We had a good, honest conversation Sunday night about that and it was actually another coach who was picking up on my frustration. And I'd asked the girls specifically to put away their phone a few times. And I think I finally made a comment like, are you here to do trampoline or would you rather be on your phone? And the other coach said, well, why are you in this sport anyway? And he sort of said, social is one of the reasons people are in sport. And both of the girls agreed, yeah, we're only just here for the social aspect. And it really took me, I think I went through a moment of absolute anger and then a moment of, okay, fine, yeah.
At least you know.
Exactly, and I thought, okay, I can accept that now. I know, like, they're
Yeah,
on
the
it.
awareness of
Yeah.
phones is really,
Yeah,
really.
but it was, I needed to know that because otherwise them being on their phone would have just continued to drive me through the
I
roof.
know something beneficial
So.
that we've done sort of to alleviate that is the athletes have agreed to put their phone in airplane mode so that they can have their music and they can still have the positives from it, but they don't have the distractions of it.
There's
And
no dings or hits or.
right, so they
Yeah.
don't feel compelled to go,
Be at their phone.
check it.
Yeah.
So that often works. But I was going to ask if you came across any studies talking about sort of those detrimental effects, sort of when they looked at something 2 hours before competition, like what kind of quantifiable stats
Yeah,
there were. like-
there aren't, well, I mean, not
There
for
aren't? So
sports.
there is, yeah, okay.
Not for
Okay.
sport. like I said, the only
It's still not out there.
study, and she's from Ryerson, which was,
Oh.
yeah, she's a Canadian that did that study
Okay.
at Pyeongchang. And she's an Olympic athlete herself now.
It'd just be neat to get some
Yes.
data.
And-
Yeah, no, but, and
Yeah.
that's the other thing, like, we're even
There's no
behind it in
data,
the sports
yeah.
psychology realm, because
Yeah,
there's
there's no data
studies.
on it. And Danielle, it ties into, we do have a question online. For high-level teams you work with, do you restrict access for big events? And if so, how long before the event? So
Mhm.
similar question.
Yeah, no, definitely, we
When-
have that planned,
Yeah.
and that's something that we talk about in our goals,
Yes. Yeah.
on a day-to-day basis. And when we're talking about their pre-competition plan, if distraction, especially I've not once had a team sport where I allowed phones the day of competition. If we're talking about individual sports, especially something like swimming or some sport where there's a long waiting period,
Mm-hmm.
and they can have access to the phones, yes, we give a certain amount of time in which they can use it, but it's limited on what they're allowed to do on it.
Okay.
So usually we use it for videos or music.
And it's, she asked how
So
long
it's on
before
social
the
media.
event.
Yeah, no,
It's
yeah,
just a
yeah,
device,
it's just a
yeah.
distraction,
Yeah.
it's a
Like on an
controlled,
iPod.
it's a controlled distraction.
Yes.
Okay, and she
And
asked
it's
how
planned.
long,
It's planned, yeah.
how long before the event? So I think she's probably asking like if, an
2 hours
event.
or-
Yeah, yeah.
Yep, it would depend, once again, that type of distraction, social media, I wouldn't allow it, like, within at least 2 hours of a competition. But if it's, once again, those planned, and controllable social media, not social media, controllable distractions,
Mhm.
like video, then I would allow that.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Just like I would allow music.
Yeah.
We use music all the time.
Same. But
Oh,
that's
yeah.
not social media.
No,
No.
yeah.
Totally, yeah.
Did you also, you had mentioned sort of briefly that the impact that they have being away from social media over a longer span of time. Did you happen to see any studies that talked about sort of the effects of?
No, but that's a really
Okay.
good question.
Because
Yeah.
I've noticed a difference in the performance of my athletes once they had, when we had that sustained long period of time, their performance started to go down. So while it went up,
Mhm.
I could feel a different, it was almost like you needed to give them their hit
Mhm.
so that you could get them back to normal again, so that they could perform again. So
Yeah.
I just didn't know. if there
No,
was
that would be a really interesting
Yeah.
study too, but no, I did not.
Well, you'd have to do, take it away first.
Yeah,
to be able to-
exactly.
Don't know
But,
if you get
no,
many-
they hadn't done, but I'm curious just in the general population, so
Yeah.
I could look at that in the general population. Good question.
Does anyone else online or you guys have any questions? Okay, well, thank you very much, Danielle. Yeah, it was a great topic, so
It's
thank you
nice.
very
It felt really,
much.
like, intimate, good chat. It
Uh,
was nice.